Hi, thanks for tuning in to our Practical Nerds weekly podcast. I'm Shubh, and together with my partner and co host Patrick, we normally invest in founders in design, construction, renovation, and logistics technology. Many of our friends in the ecosystem wanted us to start a podcast on the built world, and in return, we decided to honor their request with a show about nothing at all. Nice. Somehow doesn't get old, even though I must admit it's quite mundane and obviously about nothing at all.
I mean, nothing.
You don't. That's the answer.
That is the
Yeah.
beautiful part.
Nice. Hey, so today we're going to mix things up a little bit, Patrick.
Are
Right?
we?
We are indeed.
Oh,
Yeah. Things are finally getting a bit serious here on Practical Nerds.
okay. I
And you
feel
know
like I
what?
come unprepared for that one.
I mean, then you're right in home turf, right? If you're unprepared. So then you should be completely in your comfort zone.
Huh.
And you
Yeah,
know
you
what?
informed me 60 seconds ago what we're going to talk about.
I
So what's
did.
that?
I did. You know what? So I've been mixing things up a little bit by sharing content in our recent episodes. Now I'm going to introduce, for the first time in Practical Nerds history, a prop, right? So this is like a printout of a shovel from our dear colleague Edward, who just handed it over to me right before we started this episode, right? So that's actually the theme of this episode. How can you
Props.
spot props? Exactly.
Yeah.
Props is the theme of this episode. Yes. So the idea is how do you, because I think we as VCs, I'm sure all VCs will identify this. Perhaps some of the founders listening to us also, have made the claim, that we're selling shovels during the gold rush, right? But what
Ah,
do shovels actually look like? And I think quite often, I think too many people, I feel like, mistake just the same sort of opportunity and call them shovels and don't realize what shovels actually mean. But I thought there's a very interesting company. I would say kind of under the radar. I must admit, I didn't know about the company till a year ago. It very much escaped my attention. And to me, it very much fits this description of a company which has somehow, out of the blue, started selling shovels in a gold rush.
hmm. So what's the gold rush and what's the company?
I mean, look, if you were to ask most people today, what's the equivalent of the gold rush we are in today? It would have to be the AI boom, right? Everyone wants to jump on the AI hype train in one way or the other.
Yes.
Would you agree? And
I uh, I I I would agree with the observation. I would not agree with everyone's conclusion necessarily. But yes, I'm
hmm,
observing the same thing.
what if I told you there actually exists a company, large, publicly listed, right, operating in many parts of the world, which actually somehow is riding the AI hype, but growing faster than many of the prominent names riding the AI hype today. And this happens to be a traditional company selling electrical products, power systems, cooling systems, many of the building components that you and I are perhaps reasonably familiar with.
Then I would tell you if it's not in construction, I'm not interested.
But what if I told you there is a company like that?
Then I would listen. Then I would
Yeah,
listen.
and which is somehow riding the AI hype, doing its thing and growing rapidly, right? So
Hmm.
that's the company we're talking about. It's a company called Vertiv, Vertiv. I don't know how many of our viewers or listeners have actually heard of this company. I hadn't, I must admit, until just a year ago, which is when you and I first spoke about this company. What they do, interestingly enough, just to or maybe we'll save that for more impactful stuff. They started off as a spin-off from a larger company, which is when they went public in 2020, as a provider of electrical products, HVAC products, if you will. And now, very interestingly, what they've sort of morphed into as a specialization is provider of these power, cooling, or generally temperature control systems, heating and cooling systems for data centers,
Hmm.
right? I remember when we spoke about it like a year ago, wondering, hey, what unique timing, what a fortuitous shift, and this could really go some distance. Interestingly, I think it was also in the context of another discussion we had on ThyssenKrupp, on elevator businesses, on Pool Corp, etc. There's a pattern here that's emerging, I feel.
There is. And just to be clear, this episode today is not going to be about, hey, how awesome the construction of data centers for AI opportunity is. That deserves a show in itself, but that's today not the topic, neither the message. The topic is about what does it mean to build tooling for a mega shift? And we're using this as an example. And so perhaps, so I feel like we've already spoiled the mega shift we're using as an example here, and many people will have, exposure to this in one way or the other, have opinions, etc. So let's not talk too much about like why AI accelerates data centers. The summary is that we need a ton of new computing power, but with that we also need a ton of new infrastructure around that to be built. One of them is actually energy, the other one is cooling, the third one is connectivity, and the fourth one, also to be mentioned, is new types of chips. So
Absolutely.
any of these are like critical new components in this mega shift. So that's the mega shift portion. So talk to me about the tooling portion. What does it actually mean to build tooling using this example?
Yes. So, how about before we go there, just to give credit where credit is due, uh, I was provoked into suggesting this as a topic for today's episode by a interesting article, which I must emphasize, and the title is quite catchy, which is why I thought it's interesting. So, if you can see my screen here, it's this article in Bloomberg which says, and I'll read out for those of us not what with the having the benefit of video. It says the AI boom needs Vertiv almost as much as it needs NVIDIA. And the subtitle is Artificial Intelligence requires more than chips. It's need data centers equipped by manufacturers. Investors have taken notice.
By journalist Thomas Black.
Exactly. Right. And also just to emphasize, because some of our viewers might be wondering, hey, is it legit? How do you know Vertiv is actually doing well? So, in fact, just to emphasize this point, so this is what I'm showing here now is how Vertiv's share price on the NYC has evolved over the last, I think, 5 years. But if you zoom in on how it's done in the last year or so, you'll notice that it has gone up almost 600%, which would outperform many of the leading companies, including those that have effectively rode the AI wave. Keep in mind, this is a company which is otherwise very, has its roots in a very traditional building components provider.
So someone is pricing in a lot of expectations into this company that is building tooling for this mega shift. So
Exactly.
what's their tooling?
The tooling, what they provide is, think of it like a one-stop solution, and that's another theme that you and I have spoken about often, like like a very reliable solution to offer everything, all the infrastructure needed to set up data centers. And just to elaborate on what that means, for those of our viewers who perhaps are not familiar with what goes into it. So in my screen now, what I'm sharing is a snapshot of Vertiv's products and services from their website. So you can see a whole bunch of stuff here on cooling solutions. There's a stuff randomly lumped in under project services and rack services and so on. Think of them as like an all-in-one contractor which provides products and services to get you up and running with the data center. All the physical stuff involved with the data center, the non, let's say the non-IT, non super technical part. There's a less technical part of getting a data center run, which they take care of.
Hmm.
And when I say technical, not to dumb down what cooling systems entail, but nevertheless, it is not. When you think AI, you don't often think cooling systems and electrical products as the need of the hour, but this is what that company jumps in and solves for.
So the gold rush analogy applied to their mega shift is if you want gold, meaning data centers, the shovel that you get sold is the solutions that Vertiv has in terms of the ready-made components, the general contracting services, and the whole package
Hmm.
around that, right? So
Correct.
if I want to have a data center, I'll find my tooling here.
Yes. Yes. And I think this is what, of course, sometimes we see in, I would say, very high quality founders who are able to think through problem statements and mega shifts in more detail, as in, how do I elaborate this? I think to most founders often think of a boom or a mega shift happening and think very first step or very primary level thinking as to, or first order level thinking as to, okay, you know what? For instance, taking the example of AI. So that must mean new exciting models here are stuff which involve some sort of artificial intelligence, some maybe layering on top of chat GPT, advanced regression analysis, advanced machine learning, and all those forms. But I
Hmm.
think there's so many opportunities of second, third order consequences thinking along those lines as to, if this takes off, what will be needed to enable this. And
Hmm.
I think as much as I mean, we all know this, but it still bears a reminder that we still live in a real world, a physical world. And quite often, when new trends emerge, there are still physical manifestations of those that need to happen to actually bring these mega shifts into existence.
Hmm. And a lot of those exist in construction, right? That's the beauty of this mega large sector that is made up of, in the end, many different subverticals, but they are all unified by the topic of putting atoms in place, moving atoms in space,
Hmm.
and then manipulating the money. That's the three things I've learned construction is about, regardless of what subvertical you're in. Moving atoms, putting atoms in place, moving them around in space, and attaching the money to it.
Yes.
And that's a universal truth across the uh, subverticals. That's what's unifying, and that's also what's differentiating from many other sectors. Because in many other sectors, I actually don't need to move or manipulate atoms as much. Manufacturing a little bit, but I don't need to move them around a space as much because the
Yeah.
space is typically controlled, and thus also the money from the supply chain is way more controlled. So that's so unifying yet differentiating across the construction space, but I still find all these subverticals that have the same attributes that nobody ever looked into. I spoke to a founder today that is actually building robotics for pulling wires
Okay.
through high-rise buildings, infrastructure buildings, and I was like, my God, like I'm doing this for years, and I have never heard a founder pitch me like for that specific market. And at first sight, it looks like a very big market, right?
Oh.
So it's you can really, when you dedicate to the construction sector and spend enough time discovering alongside any mega shifts that are happening, what are these big underserved markets for which I can sell, again, tooling to allow someone else achieve their goal. You will actually find, I'm quite certain over the next decade or so, we'll have $100 billion new billion-dollar companies
Yes.
coming out of this. And it doesn't mean necessarily you build yourself. That's what construction is doing, but you give them the tooling.
Absolutely. I mean, I feel like, so the example you just mentioned, I feel like there's so many examples of these beautiful business models serving niche opportunities that are just waiting for some love from founders. Sorry for the background. I think someone just
Big city
big
life.
city, big city action. Um, and I feel like quite often in, I think the other interesting thing, which again we have harped on in some of our other episodes, but which perhaps goes a bit underappreciated, a lot of times when you chase these immediate, very obvious, what I was referring to as first order thinking type opportunities, it's inevitable pretty much that either you'll have a ton of competition right off the gate,
Mhm.
or a very big part of your story is perhaps fundraising success. In other words, you need to keep fundraising at a rapid clip to either stay relevant or stay on top of the game. Whereas I feel like there's so many opportunities where if you just go to the second, third order thinking, it allows you the luxury of little to no competition simply because not enough people or maybe even no one is looking into this space. I mean, if you're being honest to ourselves, I mean, you and I have now been investing in these spaces now for several years. I only came to know about PoolCorp and Vertiv, both large publicly listed companies, just last year, right? That's how fragmented our industry is, and I feel like and I'm sure there's, many of our viewers probably know of many other hidden champions like this, which again, the rest of the world doesn't know. And I feel like more founders should, uh, wake up to opportunities like this, and they're just, there for the taking.
Agreed. And I love that you use the word hidden champions. It's a word that is being used a lot um, in Europe to describe a lot of manufacturing companies that over the last 60, 70 years have dedicated themselves to B2B niches that the everyday Joe will never have heard about. Like I'll give you an interesting example. I
Hmm.
know of a company from my country because I like 10 years ago I interviewed with them, that are a global hidden champion, doing 2 billion of revenue a year,
Okay.
just designing and manufacturing the what's the English term for like grappling mechanisms for robots,
Uh-huh.
the uppermost spear tip that basically allows you to really manipulate the grappling of the robot. They only dedicated to perfecting that 2 billion in revenue a year.
Wow.
And these kinds of companies exist all over, but they're not in the news.
Yeah.
They're not visible to everyday Joe. They're not being something that you know because you invested in consumer or you're like a generic enterprise IT manager before. No, they actually require you to look under a million rocks to find, but they're there en masse. Actually, they're there at volume, at scale. And so construction is the biggest sector that actually has all of that, but
Yeah.
it requires you to dedicate to wanting to find those. And so then all of a sudden, when you're in that space, almost by default, you will be differentiated
And
because no one else will dare to build one.
absolutely. And what you said, actually, no one else daring to build one. I was about to say, I feel like based on the description you provided of it being like the spearhead of the grappling mechanism, and the company, would it have like a monopolistic or a very large market share of that?
I think at the time they told me they had like 80% market share globally.
Wow. I mean, isn't that beautiful? Like being in
Yeah.
that sort of situation.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so then, I mean, what do you think that family like 50 years ago, someone told them, oh, some smart VC, oh, I'm not going to invest because your TAM is too small.
Yeah.
Yeah, I need a TAM of at least a trillion dollars to make sense of it. No, you're probably in a 2.5 billion TAM and you own two of it.
Yeah. That is tremendous, man. That is really tremendous, I have to say.
And so this is something that I feel like, so to your point and the point of this episode, right? So there's such bad habits and bad wisdoms being shared by the generic VC industry with founders, bad advice that goes out that is so not applicable to B2B industries in many ways, and definitely not to one of the most nuanced ones being construction. Oh, shoot for super large markets. Well, that wisdom comes from VCs never actually having seen someone earn more than a couple low percentage points of market share.
Yeah.
But actually, in these sectors, it's possible. And there's tons of other advice that I've over the years realized is just not applicable to AEC technology, and that's just one of them.
Nice. Yeah. Um, I feel like, for those of our viewers who thought we were going to talk about opportunities capitalizing on AI, perhaps they were hoping
Sorry,
for a very different kind of company, Patrick. And then we
sorry.
started talking to them about, again, regular old, I guess, boring, traditional or more traditional kinds of businesses.
So to that same point, right? So I spoke with a founder again, also in robotics, and the founder has a very strong mechanical engineering background, but no founding
Hmm.
background. Um, what do you think other VCs told him? Well, when you go out there, make sure that you sell your robot to earn some early validation. And I told him that that's terrible advice.
Yeah.
That's like really bad advice. In construction, you're in an outcome business. They are used to procuring services and outcomes. Look for the P&L line item and offer it as a service.
Hmm.
And if you need to bring a backup crew before your robot is perfected in order to deliver the outcome while it breaks down or it doesn't deliver the quality standard yet, that's what you have the backup crew for in
Yeah.
order to then actually deliver. And I mean, it's funny because to us, having dedicated to construction for so many years now, it's become obvious, but it's still something the mind gets completely distorted by generic investor advice that is not applicable to our space, like that one.
Yes.
And I told him, if you're going to do it, that we're in a track record industry, and track record compounds. If you have executed 10 fantastic projects with people who will speak about you, the next 10 acquire themselves. I promise you, I told him, the next 10 are going to acquire themselves. The generic investor in other industries rarely sees that. And I told him, if you're going to go with their advice, sell the robot and then, prove yourself that way, it's going to take you 10 years to get to track record, because these customers are not going to buy you, long sales cycle. Then when they bought your robot, they're not going to know how to use it. So you need to do onboarding and some infrastructure and some workflow help. And then it takes them another year until they have used it for the first time. So that's 3 years down the drain until you even have like the first kind of learning.
Yes.
And I said, the fastest way to track record is doing it yourself. And in that, you could see in that moment, it was a real aha moment for him. Not because he didn't get it, but because the market told him the completely wrong things about our industry.
Yeah. Nice.
So look under 1 million rocks and then build tooling. Is there any spaces that you find interesting looking for tooling right now?
So the fascinating thing is, right, we've spoken, of course, about, the other, again, third order consequence perhaps is the more data centers come up in places where they were not expected to, they have very different kinds of energy demands, which also creates a different kind of demand for upgrade or change in grids, right?
Yes.
Of course, we have spoken about it, I think episode 13, I want to say, about grid. So check our episode out if this topic interests you. I think that's that the more I learn about grids, and I must admit, for me, it's a more recent initiative, but the more I dig into this topic of grid demands and how different power centers, and by power centers, I mean energy consumption centers, emerge with a new kind of economies, move to data centers, EVs, and whatnot, and what impact it has, it's fascinating me about the kinds of opportunities that emerge.
Yeah, don't look too deep or you will get depressed about how unrealistic most of the
Really?
beliefs of the Western politicians are.
Oh,
But
okay.
that's me coming from energy.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think tooling for the upgrade and the management of the grids is that's a very good one. I'm also looking for tooling, and usually that will be in the form of either robotics or some kind of automated tooling when it comes to trades that have characteristics like large surface areas, relatively few edges, and corner areas. Think paving, think roofing, bricklaying. We've already backed that way. Painting, perhaps. Actually, window cleaning of skyscrapers follows that logic too. So for these trades, large uniform surface areas in relation to relatively few edges and corner cases are primed to build tooling for automation. Usually in the form of robotics, usually offered as a subcontractor, at least the early years. So that's one where I think we can't build enough tooling right now, and especially for like Europe, also for the US, workforce is getting very short, and the demands of the population, unfortunately, aren't getting any shorter. So we're actually, if you think of it from a macroeconomic perspective, we want to consume as much energy per person as we did in the past, and we're not going to go down on like our living expectations in terms of energy per human, but at the same time, we're creating or transforming less energy per human into productive power. So the transformation of energy goes down, the demand for energy per human stays up. So how do you fill that gap? The answer is robotics.
Yeah. I mean, one other opportunity which we've been looking into for, I would say, several months now, which could perhaps loosely fit into what we've discussed as tooling, is, from a few emerging manufacturing economies, like, say, for example, India. There's an enormous thrust to export more, level up the manufacturing capabilities, and so on. And I think the aspirations are high, the latent capacity is very high, but you need some sort of enabler to standardize these things, to act as a sort of intermediary that homogenizes and vets the experience, or vets the experience vis-a-vis the expectation of overseas buyers when dealing with Indian manufacturers, for example. And I wonder if there's multiple tooling opportunities present. I mean, in an episode which you recently shared, we spoke about how skilling and standardizing of inputs can be that sort of a tooling for solving this manufacturing and exports opportunity. But I think that's low hanging fruit. I think there's several other enabling factors which can be used as tooling to just enable more exports and allow more of the latent capacity to become competitive at an international standard.
I like that too, and in line with that is we're currently looking at a um, company that provides tooling for such let's say smaller factories that operate a limited amount of mechanical machinery with relative machinery that has relatively limited electromechanical electrical components, relatively little software.
Okay.
And the production process would typically be batch processes. So think this could be cosmetics, this could be luxury, but within construction, actually, a ton of things
Mm-hmm.
apply to that. Tiles that we talked in the past would fall into that. Bricks would fall into that. Steel would fall into that. Cement production, to a degree, it's a bit more of a continuous process, would fall into that, but concrete would also fall into that. And so this company provides ERPs that requires no other data sources, because at these production processes, typically you wouldn't have one, and the machines wouldn't also be ready to actually connect to data sources. So that provides tooling for these like under-managed or under-digitized classical building materials.
Mm-hmm.
Factories, and by extension, it would also apply to other factories, like I mentioned, like luxury goods,
Yeah,
agri-food, etc., that has similar characteristics. And then it shouldn't go unmentioned, obviously, providing tooling for the design and planning
of course.
of construction. I mean, one of our most favorite themes is actually the 3D design and computer-aided design space for the architects, the engineers, the manufacturing people out there.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. Yeah. I mean, there's several firms we love who are in our portfolio and several others out there as well who I think are doing an excellent job retooling the design and engineering stack.
Yeah. Yeah. So look, I mean, the message of this a little bit shorter episode today was not to build data centers. If that's your thing, go for it. That's also a pretty cool vertical in construction. But the point is, you have a million of these like sub verticals for which you can build tooling and build very substantial companies.
Absolutely. Um, and if you want to hit any of us up to think of other hidden opportunities which maybe, perhaps riding the tailwinds of large mega shifts, we'd love to talk to you.
So with that said, Shub, as we ride into the weekend,
Ah,
what's the most exciting thing on your calendar for next week?
I think the most exciting thing would be this opportunity that I'm looking at, which I've referenced before on Grid, like a tooling opportunity which allows the industry to become more standardized, operate with a little bit of more intelligence and use the assets well, plan better for the future.
Mhm.
Uh, Getting, I would say, more and more excited with time, gradually. There's a couple of other opportunities which are, I guess, challenging the status quo in terms of, let's say, what the future of a managed B2B marketplace may look like. I must admit, not fully convinced, but I like at least the thought process that there are firms out there which are reimagining what the next generation of B2B marketplaces might look like. So usually when someone comes up with ideas like that, it fills me with promise and optimism that we are perhaps not far from the next cohort of great companies in this case in B2B marketplaces, but in general in most spaces.
Yeah, I would agree. In my calendar, so oftentimes I have weeks where I feel like the week needs to get me excited, and
Uh-huh.
I'm not yet hyped up for the week. But
Okay.
that today, that's a little bit different. So um, I have a very exciting board meeting with our portfolio company Enter coming up. Like
Hmm.
very big news there, and substantial direction of the company. And secondly, I'm meeting a very good serial founder team in the computer-aided design space next week.
Awesome.
Yes, sir. This was a wonderful topic. Thanks for sharing about Vertiv.
Well, it was
Uh,
fun.
can't look Can't wait to see the next prop.
I mean, for now, you'll have to deal with me showing our first prop all over again. There you go. The photo of the shell in the ground all over again.
The forests are very sad that we keep printing.
I mean, what to do? I mean, I guess we needed a prop, and we had no other means to get it done right now.
Yeah. See that's also reusable printing paper.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not tooling, but
It's not
maybe it is.
utility. Yeah.
All right, sir. Happy weekend.
Happy weekend.